Welcome everyone to our final session in your journey to discover financial confidence. I'm Jennifer Cody and will be your moderator for the evening. Tonight, we are going to take a look back at all the topics we have covered along this journey. And we are so lucky to have all 6 speakers who have joined us in these past 7 weeks here with us tonight. First, from Ciccarelli Advisory Services, we have financial advisors Jill Ciccarelli-Raps and Kay Anderson. Also joining us is Gaynell Anderson, Doctor of Physical Therapy, Carrie Kursky, President of the Kursky Group, Lisa Greenlow, Founder and President of Purpose Journey, and last but not least, Nancy Rivera, owner of Mission Organizing. But before we get started, let's review the Zoom features. At the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a microphone icon and a camera icon. When entering the meeting tonight, you are automatically muted, but tonight's going to be an open forum, so feel free to unmute yourself unless you have a lot of background noise. Then you want to stay muted until you have a question you want to ask. And for the camera, once again, if you want to be on screen, we'd love to see your smiling faces, but if not, it's up to you. Further to the right is the chat box. Our speakers will be answering questions throughout the presentation tonight. So if you have any questions, you can click on chat and enter your questions there. Or if you move a little further to the right, there is a reactions icon that's a little smiley face. Click on that and you can click on the raise your hand button. If I see your hand go up, I'll let the speakers know that you have a question. You can make sure you're unmuted and go ahead and introduce yourselves. Then finally, up in the upper right-hand corner, click on the view button and put yourself on speaker view. That way, whoever is speaking will show up in the middle of the screen. Okay, so time for the program. Jill, why don't you get us started?
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Spell Life, and all the speakers that we're able to put on such a great program. I'm kind of sad this is the last night. I've been having so much fun during the 7-part series, and I feel so grateful I get to be the moderator today because I am in a room full of wisdom. So we've got a lot to talk about. I almost feel like it's a girls' night out. Let's get around the round table and chat a little bit. So I'm going to start out with some questions that Jennifer received from the audience throughout the series. But again, Jennifer mentioned if you have a question, you can put it in the chat, and we're real happy to be here to answer what's on your mind. So don't hesitate to ask anything. Every question is a great question. So, in the beginning of the series, we talked a little bit about really mental health. What do we say to ourselves, particularly about money? I mean, there's a lot of other messages we give ourselves, but we talk about that sometimes when dealing, or really all the time, when we work with women about their finances, there's always some limiting thoughts that hold them back. And one thought that a lot of women have is I don't want to be a bag lady, literally. I mean, it doesn't matter how much assets they have, they always feel like they're never going to have enough. And that limits them quite a bit in the sense of in their spending and not feeling guilty about spending money. So I want to chat a little bit and hear from all of you on some thoughts on how to handle that. And maybe we'll start with Lisa, because Lisa, I know you do a lot of work in really recognizing and getting past old beliefs about money and worthiness and so forth. So let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah. And one of the exercises we did in my journaling session, if there's anybody who joined the call that didn't attend my session, you can go back and look at the recording. We did like kind of a mapping out our relationship with money over our lifetime, and just kind of mapped out across our lifetime how we were feeling. Were we feeling abundant and joyful and fulfilled related to money, or did we have feelings of scarcity and constraint and so forth? And it's a really helpful exercise just to kind of do a little scan, and gosh, what do I think about money? Because so many of our belief systems are very unconscious and they're really running the show. And so it's really important to become more aware of our belief systems, not just on money, but on relationships and worthiness. And like, you could apply this to anything. So that's kind of the first thing that's really important, is just to be aware that, you know what, I've got belief systems. They're running kind of, in the background all the time. A lot of it's, social conditioning or conditioning from my life. And the other thing that's important to keep in mind about kind of how our brains work, and this is kind of the bad news, but it's universal, it applies to all of us, is that our brains are kind of geared toward focusing on the negative. So, and that's kind of a biological thing, right? When we were before we were evolved as humans, right? We always had to be aware of the tiger in the woods, in the forest or whatever, right? So now we have the ability to really understand how our brains work, be aware of how our thought patterns are impacting how we feel, our behaviors, all of that, and then challenge them. And this is the good news, is that we can become aware and we can really challenge our thinking. So if we have an idea like, oh my gosh, I'm just so afraid I'm going to be a bag lady, it's like, okay, time out. Like, let me proof test that.
Mm-hmm.
How is that true? Is it likely? If that were to happen, how would I handle it? There's all kinds of techniques that we can use to overcome that kind of persistent negative thinking. And it really is becoming aware and being willing to challenge those thoughts when they come up. And then what are we focusing on? Are we focusing on the negative? Are we focused the one negative thing that happened, or the 10 positive things that happened this week that really show evidence of how abundant and prosperous I am, right? So anyway, that's just a little bit to think about in terms of, mindset.
I think that's great, because I always, I know, I mean, I've heard this and I think it may be more, but that it takes 2 times the amount of energy and focus to think of stories that serve you versus stories that don't. And I love that sentence too. When something pops up in my head, I'll say, does that serve me right now? I mean, is that going to serve me to think about I'm overwhelmed when I have a case in front of me that I got to work on, whatever it is. So I think that's great, Lisa. I'd love to hear from any of the other speakers. How do they deal with those thoughts going on in their head? Do they do anything particular when they wake up in the morning? What kind of practices do you use? Nancy, yeah.
Sometimes, you've heard people say you have to wake up and sometimes consider what you're grateful for. And so if you wake up and you take a moment to meditate and think about, what am I thankful for today? Or what was I thankful for yesterday? Or in general, that puts you in a positive a momentum, so you can start thinking along those lines. And then throughout the day, if something negative comes up, you'll recall, but look at all this positive that's happening in my life.
I love that, Nancy. And I know a lot of people that wake up in the morning or go to bed at night. And I kind of like that, because sometimes I don't sleep so well. I bet you if I focused on like 3 things or 5 things that I'm grateful for that day, it's amazing all the little things that you can be aware of. In fact, when we had Nancy Snyderman speak at Spell Life, remember that, Gaynell? She said, if you haven't smelled something, saw something, or heard something spectacular today, then you haven't been aware. You haven't been in the moment. And if you can go to bed at night and have those 3 things, and it's very interesting when you just take that little sentence. I was stopping at a tree that had a flower on it. And I said, oh, let me smell. What, is that a spectacular smell? And it's just kind of interesting. It really kind of puts you in the moment. And
Jill, Diane had her hand up. She has a question.
Oh, perfect.
She wants to go ahead and unmute herself and ask.
Okay.
Diane?
Looks like she's trying to connect to audio, so we'll just keep talking until she comes in.
Okay, just interrupt us when you can get in, Diane.
Yeah. And maybe Diane, if you can't connect to your audio for some reason, you might be able to type something in the chat room.
In the chat box, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll watch for you, but pop in anytime. Anybody else on any other practices?
Jill, I know we talked about this. The first thing, I mean, we look forward to like what gets you out of bed, the smell and taste of a good hot cup of coffee. But I think both of us go outside, and I just spend at least 10 minutes, the first 10 minutes when I get up outside. And I feel like I'm in Alice in Wonderland. I mean, the birds, I have a bird bath and they're playing in the bird bath, and little rabbits are in the grass, and you can hear the birds singing. It's just beautiful. And it just kind of puts you in that, this is a beautiful day mindset, you know, to hit the day full force. It really does make a big difference when you get out in nature.
What a great way to start the morning. Let's see if Diane, are you able to come in on audio?
Oh,
We can hear you.
Okay, am I getting feedback? Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, what I was going to add to the conversation was similar to what both Lynn and Jill and then Gaynell said, and that was a positive affirmation. When those thoughts enter my head, then I counter them with the statement that I deserve thoughts that serve me well. So you push down those or push out those negative thoughts.
That's great, Diane. I can't remember who told me this, but somebody uses the analogy of like shutting the garage door.
yeah.
Shut up those negative thoughts and turn it into something that's going to serve you. And I got to comment, Gaynell, on your practice. Honestly, Lisa, you got me to do this. I used to get up in the morning, and I'm a big worker in the morning because that's where I have my high energy. And I'd get up at 5:30. I'd go right to my computer, right to work, emails, you know, returning things. And then I wouldn't get off the chair for hours. And Lisa said, have you ever journaled? And I'm like, oh no, I'm not a writer. I don't journal. I don't know anything about it. And she said, well, you know, try getting up in the morning. I just spend a little time by myself in the morning before I start anything. And I thought, really? And so I started out with a simple meditation app that I loved for 5 minutes. And believe it or not, the first 5 minutes was really hard for me because my head's like, oh my gosh, I should be at the email, this, that. And then 5 minutes went to 10 went to 15. And now my practice is about 30 minutes in the morning where I get my coffee by myself. I know, Lisa, you'd be proud of me. But I still have some challenges journaling. So while we're on that, let me ask you one more question, Lisa, because I know a lot of what you teach is the importance and things that, you know, positive things that can come from journaling. And I'll start one day and then I won't pick it up for a month. So what are some ways to get started in a practice? And then when I want to journal, but I just can't stick with it because I might do it once a month, what advice do you have for us?
Okay, great. Two great questions. So actually, there are a lot of great ideas and journal prompts on my website, purposejournal.com. They're all free. So that's a good resource for anybody who wants to dive in, but just a few of them, like you guys were saying, like having a morning intention setting practice, an evening gratitude practice, writing prompts, asking yourself a question if there's something on your mind.
That's a good
question and writing about it. You can use a quote that inspires you and just write about what it means to you. Another thing that you can do is just free flow. So, and this is where you're not in your head, you're tapping your mind, you're really tapping your intuition. When you're not picking up your pen, you're just writing straight for 5 minutes, not picking up your pen. When you're in the place where you're journaling without thinking, that is when you really tap your inner wisdom. So you can journal with your thoughts and feelings and get those out. There's a lot of value in just getting them out. But it's when we don't think that we're really tapping our deepest inner wisdom. So those are just a few ideas just to get started. Now, sticking with it, that's a whole other question. And you know, one thing is, if you're not sticking with it, is there something that you're resistant to? And not you specifically, right? But, you know, sometimes we're just resistant because it can be hard to focus on our feelings. It's much easier to sit in front of the computer and just engage in, you know, whatever's needing attention. And we feel really satisfied with ourselves because we're productive, but we're really not getting at those really meaningful feelings and thoughts that might need to be sorted through. Another thing to keep you motivated is to remember that it's a self-care practice. It's a self-care practice and we all deserve to have that time in the morning to go outside and bring your journal, whatever it is, it's a self-care practice. And then the third thing that I'll say about staying motivated is to use your journaling to actually help you with something important. And I'll give you two examples. So one example is an idea that I gave to the Blue Zones Project. I produced a video series for them on journaling and well-being. And so I took all the Blue Zones Power 9 well-being principles. One of them is the 80% rule. 80% rule, stopping eating when you're 80% full. So how do you possibly apply journaling to not overeating? Well, gratitude journaling. So I said, look, when you've eaten, you know, like however amount of food that you want to eat, just stop and start doing gratitude journaling. And during that time that you're journaling, your feeling of fullness actually catches up. It takes us about 20 minutes to feel completely full. So you can actually use journaling as a weight loss hack.
That's very interesting. I never thought about that.
Another thing that I did just the other day, because I had jury duty this week. So on Tuesday morning, I wasn't real thrilled about going to jury duty, right? And I was trying to tell myself all those things about how important it is, you know, civic duty and all of that. And I didn't actually journal this question, but because I'm a journaler, I know about journal prompts and asking myself reflective questions that can change things for me in the moment. So I use this question that you could use this as a journaling technique. How is my day going to be extraordinary because of this journal duty experience, right? So I've already told my brain that I'm going to have some kind of extraordinary or meaningful experience from jury duty, right? So now I have conditioned my brain to start looking, instead of focusing on, oh my gosh, you know, I'm not able to do this and I'm stuck in this room and whatever, right? The coffee's terrible. You know, I'm like,
you can go for a long time when you're in jury duty thinking about all the
you can. So it's like, you know, I really use that as an opportunity. And that is a great journaling technique. And if we apply it to money, if you're worried about money or, you know, trying to get past a scarcity mentality, you can write this question in your journal. Why does money come so easily to me? Why does money and opportunities come so easily to me? So you're kind of tricking your brain to start scanning for the good, because when we ask a question, our brain goes into a completely different place than when we're telling it something. So that's just, you know, again, reiterating the power of questions and the power of journaling.
I love that, Lisa. Thank you so much. You just gave me two big insights. I think with the journaling, I got to get 5 minutes on my quiet time and just write. I'm always worried about what am I going to write? Do I have anything to write? Is it going to be?
Yeah.
I know that's not the key. You just
Yeah.
write.
Yeah.
So
You know,
that's
and
great.
that's a way to think about it. You know, there's journaling with an agenda, you know, and where you're in your mind.
Mhm.
Then there's journaling when you're trying not to think, right? You're not thinking, you're just letting things flow. And
That sounds like a relief to me.
it's, I
Like,
tell you what, it's so powerful. It's sort of like the experience that you have, like when you're in the shower. We've talked about this before. You're in the shower, you're doing something where you're not like really thinking intentionally, but you get these great ideas. It happens when we're in bed sleeping, right when we wake up in the morning, or we wake up in the middle of the night, right? That's because we're in a different state of brain function at that time. So again, those are the times when you really want to journal, because you're going to get some really great nuggets. And then you'll get to where you're like, oh man, I can't wait.
thank you, Lisa. And I just thought of the question is, how am I going to use my money to live an extraordinary life?
There you go.
Nice,
That's
powerful
another one.
question, right?
Yeah, it is. And it's part of that visualization, right? It's also, visualizing what it is that we're doing. You can write that or just, visualize it. But it's setting that's even more powerful than affirmations, because you're actually training your brain to experience it.
Right. And what I love about that is you're exercising that part of your ability that we don't exercise very often. So that's fantastic, Lisa. Kay, let's talk a little bit about a balance sheet, because early on, we taught everybody in the class how to develop a balance sheet so that they know where they are at. Because before you make any decisions, you kind of have to know where you stand. So we had a good question come in that said, they'd created a balance sheet, but do I need to share it with my personal representative or power of attorney? Like, do I need to share it with anybody at that point? Let's talk a little bit about that.
And that's a great question. I mean, the initial step of creating that balance sheet is really for yourself and your spouse, just to kind of get a feel for where you actually are and where you stand. It's your preference and choice when to share that information, but it's not essential to share that information with those that you've named in your documents until the time is necessary for someone to step in on those documents. One of the things I know we've talked about, Jill, is, just educating those that you have maybe named in those documents as to what their role will be, who you have named. I know sometimes we've had clients where they have, they've maybe named their siblings to start with, but now as their children have got older, they've switched it out and changed it to their children. But do their children really know what their role is? Do they know what it means to be a power of attorney or to be a, personal representative? And what kind of are your thoughts and feelings as to how you want them to act on your behalf?
And that's so great, Kay, because you don't have to necessarily talk about how much money you have, what kind of money you have, but it's more like what position do they hold? And by the way, who would they call if something happened? And I got to tell you, one of the biggest challenges we have in our clients' lives is healthcare management. And it's healthcare management, maybe for themselves, maybe for their parents. A lot of, I say kids, they're in their 50s or 60s, they're wondering, does their parents have enough assets to take care of them? If they did become ill or disabled, do they want to stay at home? What's their care plan? What do they want to do? And those conversations are somewhat difficult to have, but the balance sheet helps so much, because when something urgent happens and you don't have a lot of time to prepare for it, you got to know where things are, and you have to understand how to hop on those assets or sign things or what have you. So a lot of that stuff needs to be done preliminary. And I love your conversation about the positions. And then as you develop, you might have more in-depth conversations with your kids, right?
Exactly. It's really not about the numbers. It's really about the information and just knowing that it's in one place, knowing what's there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we're talking about organizing, one of my favorite topics, because I'm not a great organizer. I really have to work at it. Nancy, and I felt this quite often. Where do you start organizing when you're feeling overwhelmed? That's a big word for me. I don't know about anybody else.
You know, and that's a good question, because when I get the calls, 9 out of 10 times that's what's coming out of their mouth. I'm overwhelmed. And so it is sometimes daunting to them when they look at their space or wherever it is that they want to get organized. So usually when I meet with someone and I assess the space or the place that they want to get organized, I try to help them maybe start somewhere small. So let's say if it's an office, I may say, let's just work on the desktop. If it's a kitchen, let's maybe work on a drawer. And the reason I help them do that is because if they see the process within a small space and they see like, okay, well, this is doable. Yeah, I can manage it. It doesn't become impossible, because they'll look at that drawer and when we're finished with it, or that space, and they're like, and we got all that done. So then they realize it's something that they can accomplish. And that's why I say, let's keep it small in the beginning, and then we work inch by inch in the room.
Nancy, I definitely could have used you this past weekend. I am getting ready to replace all of my tiles in my entire house. So I said to myself, I took a few days off last week, and I said, you know, I'm going to go through the house, get rid of anything that I don't need, and I'll organize. So now what I have is I have a disaster in 4 different rooms. I pulled out certain things in one room. I didn't want to deal with it, so I moved on to the next one.
Yeah, and you know, just you have to be realistic too, because we know what our schedules are. So we have to be realistic and say, could this be something that I could spend maybe 15 minutes a day in increments? You know, sometimes we're all or nothing. If we can't get the whole room done, we don't even start. And that really is what, you know, stops us from moving forward. So
yeah, I understand, Kate, because I do that all the time. I'm in my organization mode and I start in the garage, but somehow I got a piece of clothing. So I run it up to the closet, and then I decide I want to color code my closet and I start pulling everything apart, and then it goes to the next room, you know, and then all of a sudden you're just total mess. So if you need help, just call. We'll come and rescue you. Also, Nancy, I wanted to ask you, because this is a big thing that I run across. You know, you had helped me organizing more of my projects coming in and what's a priority, and my emails and all, you know, tens of thousands of things coming in at once. And so we came up with a system, but then it's so easy just to go back to your old habits. Just give us one hint, like how do we stay on track? Because it really is about the habits, you know, we're using to stay organized or whatever we're working on.
It is, and that's why sometimes when I'm with clients, I try to figure out a method that's very simple, you know, and maybe sometimes what it may require is to select the day of the week that it'll be your theme day. Like, for example, I have Thursday to water my plants, because I think in my head, my plants are thirsty. So I think of Thursday, you know, so sometimes a theme day might help us to just say, this is the day I'm going to spend on doing some administrative stuff or work. But truly, to develop a good habit, you have to go back to remember the positive of that experience you had with Nancy. And so if you figure out like, oh, that felt so good when I decluttered, when now I have a system, that feels wonderful. Go back to that feeling and say to yourself, okay, so what do I need to do to keep that feeling? But decide what's good for you. We're all different. So someone could say, well, I could do a little bit of admin every day. Or you may say, I only have one day. Maybe it's your Friday. That's the only day I have. That's fine. Start practicing those systems that we talked about and put them to use. Just find what that day is, but always remember the reward, because the reward is what's going to help that habit to stay in practice.
Could my reward be ice cream? Every time I do a habit, I get a bowl of ice cream. Then I might need Lisa's journaling after that. I don't know. So thank you, Nancy. Carrie, I get this, unfortunately, I don't know how many a week we get this call or email. I think I have an identity theft problem. What do I do? And I
Yes.
know I'd love for you to comment on that because honestly, I just had one this today. Somebody, reach out to us.
Yeah, and it really is a big question. And the reason I say that is because not all identity theft is the same. Everyone just clumps it into one category. So when people contact us saying that they've been a victim of identity theft, we just ask them, explain a little bit about what happened. Sometimes it's identity theft in the traditional sense, meaning somebody applied for a new credit card, or somebody, tried to get into their account, or somebody used their credit card, most of the financial stuff that people think about.
Mhm.
So what we usually do is we find out first what happened, and then you also need to look at what information was used for them to be successful. So that really is going to help kind of figure out what the game plan is. The other thing too is we see there's a lot of, even though it's well-intended information online, it's very old and outdated, and it's not keeping up with the technology. For example, the biggest one I still deal with is people using a credit lock instead of a credit freeze for prevention. And one of them, your rights are protected by federal law. The other one, you hope and pray the Bureau does the right thing. So there really is a big difference. And also when someone's a victim of identity theft, you go through the same emotional responses that a victim of a violent crime. And that means you're not thinking clearly, because you're going through fear, you're going through anger, you're going through denial, you're going through, there's so many different categories of things that you're going through. And so people make rash decisions. Another thing that we find with identity theft victims is they don't know what their rights are, which is typical because, I only know this because this is what I do for a full-time basis for, 16 plus years. But for the average person, you have no reason to even pay attention to any of this unless something happens to you. And the companies know this and they take advantage of it. I had a call from a gentleman a few weeks ago, and he's like, I'm an identity theft victim. Someone had initiated a wire transfer out of his account. He didn't do it. Somehow they got into the account. And when he reported it, there was, the bank was saying it actually came from him because there was, his computer had been compromised because they clicked on something. So there was a lot of back and forth. And he's like, I've been dealing with this for months. And that's usually by the time people reach out to us is after months. And so I said, well, what have you done so far? And he told me what the steps he'd taken. Well, with him, what it was coming down to is that the creditor, they kept telling him, you haven't sent us the police report. Well, he kept sending the police report, and they kept saying, no, you haven't sent the police report. What they're referring to is not the police report, it's the Federal Trade Commission's identity theft affidavit. But they weren't telling him that. And I have seen this for 15 years. So I told him, I said, go to the FTC's website, fill out this form, print it out, and then submit that along with everything else you've already submitted in the past and send it certified return receipt requested. I said, if you still have issues, give me a call, then we'll get involved. But I said, I think that's the only thing that's keeping you from being successful. He just called me an hour before we got on this call tonight. And he said, I have my $20,000 back in my account.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So those little hints, they're big hints really, because it can be very frustrating. No
Right, because
doubt.
unfortunately, there is no standard, do these 5 things and this is how you recover. Really depends on what was involved. Was it employment identity theft? Was it IRS? Was it, involving a bank, credit cards, medical? Then there's criminal identity theft. So really the big thing that we try to deal with people or help people work through is tell us what happened. And tell us what you've done so far. So that way we can help them create a plan. And like this case with this gentleman, he only had one step to do. I didn't charge him. I just sent him the link and said, you have one form to fill out, go ahead and do it. And I said, if you still have trouble, then call us back and hire us, we'll help you. Really, it just depends. But I wish I had a quick and easy down and dirty answer of what do I do with identity theft? It's do these 5 things, but it really just depends on the situation. But the biggest thing that you have to do is you have to contact anyone that was involved. It used to be get a police report, but now you can go to the Federal Trade Commission's website, which is identitytheft.gov. and you can fill out their form. Now, it does say it also gives you a restoration plan. I can tell you their plan is about 10 years old. And it only has about 40% of what you actually need to do. But having that document is your proof that you're a victim of identity theft. So that's usually the first step, but just contact the organization, explain you're a victim, and say, what do you need from me to prove this wasn't mine?
Mhm.
And
Makes
then
sense.
kind of go from there. Sometimes, it's a quick and easy where you can take care of it, but other times it might be more involved. And it also depends on the dollar amount.
Mhm.
We've found that once it gets about that $20,000 mark, the financial institutions want to play some hardball because they don't want to be out that money, especially the credit card companies. Under that, if it's a couple $1,000s, couple $100s, it's not a big issue. But once you start talking big issue dollar amounts, that's when they're going to play hardball with you. So that might be a good time to get somebody involved.
Gotcha. Well, I like that credit freeze versus credit lock, because we tell our clients credit freeze, but I can understand that credit lock is something totally different, right?
Yes.
Where
And the
they're-
credit bureaus purposely try to confuse you because, like I said, a credit freeze, what they are required, the bureaus are required to do is mandated by federal law. It's the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And it states that you're entitled to have a credit freeze for free. They cannot charge you to activate it, to temporarily lift it, or to remove it. It's free for life. Well, bureaus make money by selling credit reports. So they came up with a credit lock. So if you have a credit lock, you technically do not have a freeze. So that gives them a gray area. And I've noticed with some clients that we've worked with when we reviewed their Experian credit reports, if you have a credit freeze, it's going to say right on your report, consumers has a security freeze or credit freeze put in place, because you can still get your own report even with a credit freeze. It's just a new creditor can't see it. But the ones with Experian that have the credit lock only, there's no statement on the credit report. Yeah, and if they release the credit report to a new creditor, what legal recourse do you have? Because it's a lock and not a freeze. And now, most recently, I've noticed that with Experian, when you use because now all three bureaus allow you to set up an online account to manage a freeze. You have Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. Experian, they just started last week with this online account for managing a freeze. But when you go through and do everything, it tries to get you to upgrade to a credit lock. And then they'll try to sell you the $25 a month identity protection service.
Yeah, that's good to know. Now, I know when I sat with you, Carrie, you talked about like 5 credit agencies. Do we just have to go to the top ones, or do we have to go to all of them and do that credit freeze?
There are actually dozens of credit bureaus out there, but we've seen activity on 5 of them. And the reason we're seeing this activity is because the criminals know that more and more people are taking advantage of a credit freeze. Okay. So they know their chances of applying for credit for these people is going to be pretty slim to none. So they're starting to target creditors that use these other bureaus where you do not have a freeze, primarily mobile phone accounts, utility accounts, and that's NCTUE, National Consumer Telecom Utilities Exchange. Then there's also the 4th credit bureau, which is Innovis, INNOVIS. They're becoming more robust. In the last 2 months with some of our newer clients, we've noticed, because they're like, oh yeah, I had an identity theft issue a year or 2 ago, but I locked everything down. So we always confirm, we go in the online accounts, make sure they have a freeze instead of a lock. There was nothing new because they had done that. When we looked at the Innovis reports, we found activity. And they said, we never even heard of this one. And then we also, for some people, if they get letters in the mail saying, thank you for opening your bank account, then we go over to the consumer reporting agencies that are for the banking industry, such as ChexSystems. And then we will run a report there. And oftentimes we'll see a Charles Schwab inquiry. And the bad guys are setting up those accounts so that they can money launder using the victim's identity.
Wow, that's amazing. And, some of the things we talk about our clients, is there any reason you wouldn't do a credit freeze besides it being kind of a pain administratively? If you go to try to get credit, you got to unlock it, lock it back, and there's a small fee, right? But is there any downside to freezing? Is there any reason why somebody wouldn't want to freeze?
No, and actually the credit bureaus have done that marketing campaign who say that a credit freeze is difficult to manage. It's not. We have
Mhm.
some clients where we'll manage all that for them just because, you know, they might have to pull their credit once every couple of years and they don't want to have to remember where all that is. So we manage it for them. And I literally have had them call me from the car dealership because they were trading their lease in for a new one and they forgot they had the freeze. And while we're on the phone in 5 minutes, I was able to lift with the big three bureaus because those are ones that usually do for the auto loans. It takes 5 minutes to do. You literally log in, username and password, hit a button, push the dates of when you want it to start, when you want it to stop. There is no reason to not have a credit freeze. It is so simple and easy to manage now. Everyone should do it. Now,
Thank you.
minors, you can't freeze because you can't freeze what doesn't exist. However, if they're under the age of 16, a parent or guardian can request a freeze on their behalf. When they turn 18, the freeze comes off.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Well, Todd, I've got so many questions, Carrie, because this is such an important area and there's so much happening every day. I mean, like I said, we get requests all the time, things that are happening, you know, to people on this area. But if we were just healthy and we want to maintain a healthy identity, so freeze our credit, we tell our clients definitely monitor your monthly statements, you know,
Yes.
to make sure you're looking over those, especially younger people, since everything's auto, they don't even look at it. I mean, if their bank balance looks reasonable, they never look through their transactions. And I know that over time they could be testing you, right? And then start to get bigger and bigger. We tell our clients once a year to order a free credit report. Most states allow that, right?
Yeah, and actually it's part of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. It's a federal law where you're entitled to get one free report from each bureau every 12 months.
Mhm.
However, due to COVID, if you go to annualcreditreport.com, I believe it is until May of next year. I'll have to double check because they keep extending it. But you can get one free one a week. Now,
Okay.
if you have the online accounts for managing your credit freezes, you can look at your report right in those accounts.
Gotcha. I think we've got a question from Paul. Paul, do you have a question? You can unmute yourself if you'd like.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
So I have a friend that's going through a rough time, and it's a family member that seems to be able to find every bank account she opens new, and they're stealing money. How do they go about doing a credit freeze? Do you go to one credit bureau? And would that help to keep that bank account out of the wrong hands?
So that's a great question. And unfortunately, when it is a family member involved, those are much more difficult to deal with. Because anytime you say you know the person, then you get a lot of pushback from the financial institutions. But a credit freeze is typically for credit accounts, which bank accounts are not. Okay.
But when
it's
you
still-
open a new bank account, doesn't it show up on your credit report?
No, bank accounts do
doesn't?
not show up on credit reports. Now, some banks in recent years have started doing a credit check for opening a bank account. Not all of them, some of them do. But if you put a freeze with check systems, if the bank uses check systems to verify the person, because they want to know what kind of banking client they are, if they bounce checks, you know, overdrafts, those sorts of things, you can put a freeze with check systems. That's CHEXSYSTEM. If you put a freeze with that, it's
Say that
only if
again.
that bank participates and uses them.
Yeah.
Then they wouldn't be able to open the account because it would say file frozen. So they couldn't look at the banking history. But banks are very difficult because it's not like credit bureaus or credit monitoring where anything credit related goes through the same big three companies and a couple of the other, the smaller ones. Banking, there's no real central database for that, except for like check systems. And there's also early warning system. It doesn't have as much on there. It's not as robust. So again, unless we've seen proof of other types, then we will pull that one. But yeah, dealing with bank accounts, it is much more difficult to do. Now, what the person could do is they can also, you're entitled by federal law to put a disclaimer on your credit report. So if they have additional information, you know, about this person, you know, I don't know if I'd go so far as to put a name, but you can just say, if anybody tries to, you know, open an account from, you know, such and such address or whatever, you know, I'm a victim of identity theft, you know, you can try to do that too. it's just the bank accounts are very difficult. And
Yeah.
that's why we tell all of our clients, you can't prevent all identity theft. It's impossible. But our goal is to make our clients' identities difficult to use, so bad guys move on to easier targets. And then you have to have a plan in place for when things go wrong, because they will. But in this case, with it being a family member, if your friend or client, if have they gotten any police reports or filed anything like that?
And it's a daughter, so they don't want to get her arrested.
Yeah, so
And
unfortunately, if the parents are not willing to file a police report, they're going to have a very hard time disputing any of those accounts. So it's one of those decisions, very difficult decisions that sometimes a victim has to make, is how much are they willing to accept? Because until they get a police report or report her, especially since they know her, until they report her and tell law enforcement that if they, try to prosecute, that they would be willing to prosecute or bring charges, I should say, they're going to have a very difficult time overcoming any fraud.
You know,
Yeah.
you can see how this gets so complicated, because especially for the elderly that maybe aren't monitoring their accounts, or it's getting tougher and tougher for them to do that, how often this must happen. And
We
then to
see a
turn it
lot.
around is tough. Well,
Yeah.
Carrie, I'm getting stressed out just thinking about all this. So I need to
Sorry.
go to Gaynell for a minute. Gaynell, we talked about breathing and how important breath is to really your health, your wellness, having clearer thought processes, and really managing the stress. So you talked a little bit about exercises that would strengthen our diaphragm. Is it something we have to practice with repetition, or are there certain techniques we should think about to get us started on that?
Right. Yeah. I just wanted to say one thing before I
Sure.
touch on that. And
Yeah.
that is how everybody is kind of interconnected on the journaling and putting your financial plan together and organizing. If they could just remember a few things with the brain, if you were to do some diaphragmatic regular breaths, consistent, like breathing 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, and breathing in and out through your nose, remember that that's going to do two things. Number one, it's going to reorganize your brain function. Those brain waves become synchronized, which extremely increases cognitive function. And then if you just spend even, they say as little as 3 full diaphragmatic breaths can change the function of your cognitive function. So if you want to be creative and write something or write in your journal, if you just do that, maybe even just take 10 breaths in and out through your nose, it's like you're reorganizing your brain, just like you're reorganizing the space around you, so that you can then retract the information quickly and easily, much more so than if you're, number one, stressed out, you're breathing sporadically in short breaths, you're breathing in and out through your mouth. It's like working in the space that Kay was working in, trying to clear for her floors. Your Jill is in all the different rooms, going from one room to the next to the next. It's just the easiest way to reorganize your brain to be able to really get some great creative writing in your journal, and to not make mistakes like opening up things when you're rushing and your brain is not really focusing, and opening up email that you shouldn't have opened, and then you're all in a big mess with identity theft. So that's important. If you just remember those few things, if you do that when you've got to highly focus on something, it's like cleaning up the room, cleaning up your surroundings, and organizing to be able to retract that information.
So Gaynell, as you were talking, I don't know about any of the other people in the room, but I was trying to breathe. 5 in, 5 out. But could you just, you say diaphragmatic breathing. Is there any special thing I need to be doing with my core and my diaphragm, or can I just literally count to 5?
Okay, so
then go down.
Okay, so it's not up, so that's down right there.
Okay.
So that's the biggest thing is learning to know what it feels like to breathe with your diaphragm, which is really normal breathing. Children breathe that way naturally. We should be breathing that way naturally, but with lifestyles today, we've just gotten weak there. just like we do in any other muscles that we don't use fully and properly. And the first thing is, yeah, you want to learn how to use your diaphragm and have that sensory connection of using your diaphragm. So when you're breathing with your diaphragm, your ribs will expand out. There's no change in your spinal posture whatsoever. And your abdomen will expand out as you inhale. Your abdomen will naturally sink back in, and your ribs will naturally sink back in as you exhale. The biggest thing is, if you're having difficulty with this, that maybe you should get things checked out, because other areas of the body can limit your ability to use your diaphragm. If you work at a desk all the time and your spine has become a little bit more in the forward position, that's like cramping the diaphragm, and you're not going to be able to fully utilize the diaphragm and the other diaphragms that are affiliated with it. If
if I
Let's see.
might, I agree with you 1,000,000%. Somebody years ago taught me about the breathing. And just last night, I was having trouble falling asleep because my mind was racing with all the things I need to do. And so the trick that I do for myself is breathing in, it's smell the cookies, and breathing out, it's put out the fire. And
Yeah.
I do this when I start feeling the overwhelm. It's like time to smell the cookies.
I like it.
Exactly.
So
And
it absolutely
that-
works.
Right.
You know, another technique for Carrie, when you can't go to sleep and your mind is racing, is getting out your journal and writing a to-do list for the next day, because it just takes all of that out there and puts it on paper, and you're like, oh, okay, got this covered. I know exactly what to do tomorrow. And that can be really helpful.
I do that
Perfect.
every day, because
And
otherwise.
all of that, you're
Don't
right.
forget to do this, don't forget to do that. Every day I make my list for the next day, so I know exactly what I need to do.
And you know what you're actually doing is you're actually decluttering your brain.
Right.
Exactly.
That's
You are
really what you
decluttering
need
your
to do.
brain.
I've been hearing everybody talking about journaling in the morning, but if you have a lot on your mind, then just take a few seconds, like you brought out already, write it down, and then you can go into journaling, whatever creativeness comes out of you, because you empty out your brain.
Okay, so I
Exactly.
have
All I
a
can
morning
say is
practice. Now I need an evening practice
Just
to
do it,
journal and get it all
because-
out. I like it.
Right. You'll notice how the effect the diaphragm has on whether you want to improve your sleep, and whether you want to improve your cognitive function or your focus, or whether you want to improve your endurance for an athletic performance. The first step is, though, you have to have that connection with your diaphragm and know what it feels like to use your diaphragm. And mostly what I can say, and that's considered natural breathing, like I said, your ribs will come out, your abdomen will come out. But when you breathe with your diaphragm, there is absolutely no exertion whatsoever. So when you breathe out, you shouldn't feel tension anywhere. Not in your abdomen, not your abdominal muscles, not your chest area. There should be no tension at all. And as you get your diaphragm stronger and stronger, you're going to begin to feel the triggering of your core, which is a tension from your pelvis upward. So when we breathe with our diaphragm and engage the core with it, ultimately, you are actually lifting yourself away from the ground. You're de-weighting yourself, and what you should feel is a release and tension everywhere. So you shouldn't feel tension in your neck, in your back, in your shoulders, anywhere at all. If you're not breathing fully with your diaphragm, you're not engaging your core, your muscles that engage actually pull you down to the ground. So they weigh you and you will feel tension. So if I'm blowing air out, I'm going to feel tension in my stomach. So that is not a natural diaphragmatic exhale. Now, sometimes once you know how to use your diaphragm properly, again, you can use it for different types of breathing for different purposes. And that's where we talked about how your breath works on its own and you need it for life to thrive, but how you utilize it extremely increases your quality of life and your ability to function and to feel good and have positive thoughts and all of that. So the first step is, making sure that you have a good mobility to fully utilize your diaphragm. So those first exercises that we went over are for that purpose. So the first sequence is actually getting back in touch with your diaphragm and being able to breathe with just your diaphragm, not using any accessory muscles whatsoever, and then engaging your core with your diaphragm. Once you can use your diaphragm and you know what it feels like to breathe, and you feel you're fully breathing, but nothing is tightening in your abdomen, in your back, in your shoulders, in your neck, then you're breathing with your diaphragm, then yes, there are exercises that you can do to actually strengthen your diaphragm or increase the mobility of your diaphragm, or even target those portions of your diaphragm that you want to strengthen to improve the function of a particular lung or lobe of the lung. So let's say, you know, you had pneumonia, or you have COPD, or you were intubated, or you had part of a lung removed because of cancer or for whatever reason. You can increase the mobility and the strength, say, on the other side, and improve the function of the lungs on the other side to improve your overall oxygenation and carbon dioxide balance and everything from there. So just like any other part of the body, tissues grow back, and tissues can compensate for other areas that are not working properly. And this goes for almost any organ in the body. We just don't utilize it. We don't, you know, do that. So
Well, that's so interesting, Gaynell, because you never think about exercising your diaphragm. You think about, you know, leg
It's a
muscles,
muscle.
and arm muscles, and, you know, the brain muscle, but the diaphragm muscle. And I know, you know, you had taught me a lot about breathing. Typically what I do when I'm super stressed, I'm moving fast, is I must be short breathing, you know, real short, because my chest feels heavy at the end of the day. My back hurts, you know, maybe I have a little bit of a headache, and then I realize I'm not breathing, you know, literally. So what a great,
yeah, that's one
you
of
know,
the biggest topics today, is the fact that what they're finding is that people think if they breathe more, that's better. So they're trying to take more breaths, say, per minute, thinking they're going to get more oxygen in, they're going to release a lot more. And that's not the case. It's actually the fewer breaths you take full per minute, your body actually gains much more oxygenation and carbon dioxide balance for improved function everywhere. So we don't want to breathe more. We want to breathe more efficiently. So actually it's breathing less. Taking
interesting.
a full natural breath and a full, should be even a little bit longer exhale. And then you will get more benefit from the communication systems and from your oxygenation, improving lung function and everything from there. So yeah, you
That's
learn
fantastic.
to use your diaphragm. And if you cannot get that sensation of your ribs expanding out or coming in, or your abdomen expanding out as you breathe in and just naturally sinking in as you breathe out, then, you know, maybe have it assessed and evaluated. It might be that you've got tightness in your ribs or in your spine, or even fascially, that no matter how hard you try, you're not going to fully utilize that diaphragm because it's limited because of other things.
Wow, that's interesting. And I love what you say is you can exercise it and you can improve it, which is a key, you know, especially if you're not sure what you're doing, you can go out and get guidance on how to do that. I could be here for hours with you ladies, because there's so much still that I want to ask everybody, but unfortunately we're getting down to the hour, and I do want to share some resources. Kay, I wonder if you could bring up the Spell Life website, because a couple of things. One is that these sessions that we did, the 7-part series, is recorded. You can access them on the website. So under special events, if you open that up, you can see the women's journey. Now, what will happen is these will actually be archived. So, Kay, would you go to the archive button up on top? And if you go to the journey to financial discovery, Anybody that purchased tickets tonight can go in here with a special code, which you have, and we'll send that out again as a follow-up. And you can go in and access all of these recordings, plus all the handouts that each speaker had in their recording. So this will be up on the website. We'll also have an opportunity, if you have friends or family that you think you want them to hear this, they'll have an opportunity to make a small donation, any kind that they want, to access some of these recordings. So they'll have an opportunity to do that. As well, I want to also just make note of the podcast tab, because a lot of the speakers that were on tonight happen to have a podcast, and this is an hour conversation with some of the guests tonight on certain topics, and they really are fantastic. If you listen to podcasts at all, you can download the Spell Life podcast on any of the major podcast sites, and you can follow it. And then I believe every other week, a new podcast is posted. So I encourage you to go on there as well for resources. And also, if you had questions tonight that we didn't get to, because there were several we didn't get to, and you really want to get an answer from one of our speakers, email Jennifer at cas-naplesfl.com with your question, and then she will go ahead and forward it to one of the speakers to try to get that answered for you. Thank you so much for joining us during the 7-part series. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you to all the speakers that came together to make this happen. We really appreciate it. Thanks for the claps in the audience. We see some clapping going on. And I hope you learn something and can take away something from this 7-part journey that's really going to make your life extraordinary. So have a great evening, everyone, and we'll look forward to hopefully having more sessions that you can join through Spell Life and more series like this. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Have a
Jill.
great night.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Night.